I put my coat on at the dinner table. My sister was mid-sentence. 7 people were seated around the folding table she had pushed against the window. Her 2 friends from the marketing firm, her boyfriend Ren, the couple from downstairs whose names I could never remember in the right order, and our cousin Yolanda, who had driven in from Columbus for the weekend. I had made the pasta. I had bought the wine. I had spent 45 minutes that afternoon rearranging the second set of chairs we borrowed from the hallway closet so that everyone would have enough room. I put my coat on and I picked up my keys from the porcelain bowl by the door and I walked out. That was a Tuesday in February at 8:47 in the evening. I am Delia Galloway, and I was 23 years old, and I had been waiting for a moment like that one for longer than I knew how to say. I moved into that apartment when I was 20. My sister Petra was 26, and she had been living there for 2 years already, and when her previous roommate left she called me and said she needed someone reliable. She did not say she wanted me there. She said she needed someone reliable. I was young enough then not to notice the difference. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building on the east side of the city, and it had 2 small bedrooms and a kitchen that smelled like the neighbor's cumin regardless of what we cooked. I paid $847 a month. Petra paid $903. The building was old enough that the heat was inconsistent, and we had learned, by November of the first year, to keep extra blankets folded over the arm of the sofa. The copper kettle I had bought at the second-hand store on Farwell Avenue sat permanently on the back left burner, which was the only one that worked reliably. I want you to understand something about who my sister was before I tell you what she did at that dinner. Because it matters, even when it's hard to say. Petra was 6 years older than me, and she had grown up, just as I had, in a house where our mother had a favorite. Petra was the favorite. She was the one who got the new coat at the start of every school year, while I wore hers from the year before. She was the one who got driven to dance recitals while I took the bus. She was the one our mother talked about when her friends called. Petra got a promotion. Petra's apartment is beautiful. Petra, 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 until my name in my mother's mouth became something small and apologetic, something offered as a footnote after the real story had already been told. I spent years telling myself that Petra hadn't chosen any of that she had been handed a role the same way I had, that underneath the favoritism and the easy confidence she wore like a second skin, there was a woman who understood what it felt like to be overlooked. I was wrong. Or maybe I was right once, and something had shifted. I am still not entirely sure. What I know is that the patterns our mother practiced on us, Petra had made her own. Not because she was calculating about it. I don't think she was. I think she had grown up understanding that in any room of 2, one person was the capable one and one person was the afterthought, and she had simply decided, very early, which one she would be. And, because I was the closest person in her daily life, I became the afterthought by default. Not through cruelty, I used to tell myself. Through habit. Through the kind of wound that gets passed down through generations without anyone choosing to pass it. One person learning to survive by diminishing, and then doing exactly that to the next person available. She had been doing it so long, I think, that she didn't even know she was doing it anymore. The first year, I let most of it go. I told myself we were still adjusting, still learning to live together, that the small frictions were normal and would smooth themselves out with time. When she mentioned, at a gathering with her friends, that I wasn't the academic type, I laughed along with everyone else and told myself it was a joke and she meant nothing by it. When she introduced me to her colleague as my little sister, she does admin work. I was an office coordinator, which is a different thing, and she knew the difference. I corrected it gently later in the car and she said, I didn't think it mattered, and I accepted that because I didn't know yet how much it would come to matter. By the second year, I had stopped correcting. I had learned, the way you learn these things through accumulated small moments rather than a single large revelation, that correcting Petra produced a particular sequence of responses. First a mild irritation, then an explanation of why her version was essentially accurate, then a longer silence that sat in the apartment for a day or 2 before dispersing. The correction cost more than the original comment. So I stopped making them. By the 3rd year, I had developed a habit I did not fully recognize as a habit. I kept my accomplishments quiet around Petra. I did not mention the night school class I had enrolled in, the intermediate graphic design course that met on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, because I had noticed, in a dozen small incidents I could not have cited individually but could feel collectively, that Petra's response to my good news was a particular kind of neutral that was worse than indifference. It was the neutral of someone who had already categorized you and found your news slightly inconsistent with that categorization and chose, therefore, to simply not incorporate it. I had stopped trying to be incorporated. I kept the class to myself. I kept the progress reports, the small victories, the instructor's comments written in the margins of my return projects, entirely to myself. I put them in the cedar box where I kept my grandmother's letters, alongside the things I didn't want managed. That was the life I had built inside the life I was living, and I had not understood until January that the inside life had become the real one. The comment happened at 8:37 in the evening, on the third Tuesday of February, while I was in the kitchen refilling the pasta bowl. I heard it from 8 feet away. The kitchen was not separated from the dining area by anything except a counter with a chrome edge, and sound carried easily in that apartment, especially when all the windows were closed against the cold. Wren had said something I missed, something about a colleague of his who had gone back to school in her 30s. And Petra said, easily, without pausing, as if it were simply a known fact being confirmed rather than a judgment being delivered. Good for her. Some people have the kind of brain for that. Delia's never been the smart one. We all kind of just pretend she is. She said it the way you say, it's supposed to snow Thursday. Informational. Faintly tired. The kind of thing you say because you assume the room already knows, and you're only confirming what everyone has privately understood for years. The room did not go quiet. That was the part one kept coming back to in the weeks afterward. The room did not go quiet. Yolanda shifted in her chair. Someone reached for the wine bottle. I heard Wren make a sound that might have been a short laugh or might have been a cough, the kind of sound a person makes when they are not sure what register the moment requires. I stood at the counter with the serving spoon in my hand. I counted to 8. I set the spoon down next to the pasta bowl. I did not cry. I did not go back to the table with the refilled bowl, set it down, and pretend I hadn't heard. I did not find Petra's eye and wait for the look that would tell me she hadn't meant it, that it was a joke, that she was sorry, and would say so in the car on the way home, or in the kitchen the next morning over coffee. That look was not coming. I had been waiting for that look in one form or another for 3 years, and I had run out of time to keep waiting for it. I walked to the coat rack by the door. I took my coat off the second hook, my hook, the one on the right, because Petra had long ago established that the left hook was hers. I reached into the ceramic bowl, the small white one with a painted blue rim that I had bought at the market on Clement Street because I liked it, not because anyone had asked me to buy it or told me we needed one, and I took out my keys. I set them back down on the kitchen counter. Not in the bowl. On the counter. Flat. That was the only statement I made. Then I picked up the canvas tote bag from the corner behind the coat rack, the one I had packed 14 days earlier on a Sunday afternoon when Petra was at Wren's place and the apartment was quiet, packed methodically and without drama, a change of clothes, my toothbrush, my social security card, and the folder of documents I needed, the small leather-bound appointment book where I kept the numbers and addresses that actually mattered to me, and I walked out the front door and closed it. Behind me with a click that was neither loud nor quiet. It was just a door closing. She did not come after me. I don't think she noticed, at first, that I had gone. There are things you do in the weeks before you leave that no one sees. I had started planning in earnest at the beginning of January, after an incident that was not dramatic and was therefore somehow worse than the dramatic ones. Petra had been on the phone with our mother in the living room, and I had walked through to get a glass of water, and she had put her hand over the receiver and said, without particular heat, "Can you try not to just wander around while I'm talking?" And I had stopped walking. And I had stood there for a moment in my own living room, or the living room I paid $847 a month to partially own, and I thought, I've been trying not to wander around for 3 years. I have been editing my presence in this apartment for 3 years. I am 23 years old, and I have been making myself small in a home I pay for, and I cannot remember the last time I walked through a room without calculating whether my presence would bother someone. I started talking to Simone the next morning. Simone worked the afternoon shift at the copy center on the ground floor of my office building. She was 41. She had 2 kids in middle school, and she had left a marriage at 34 and started over with 2 garbage bags of belongings and a car that needed new brake pads. I had known her for 2 years in the way you know someone you see 4 or 5 times a week across a service counter. Pleasantly, reliably, without depth, until the January morning I came in 15 minutes before my shift started and stood at the counter and heard myself say, to my own surprise, "I think I need to leave my apartment. I don't know how to do it." Simone set down the stack of paper she was sorting. She looked at me for a moment without saying anything. Then she said, "How long have you been thinking about it?" "Since October," I said. "Then you already know you're going to do it," she said. "You're just waiting for permission." She slid a cup of coffee across the counter, the pot behind the counter, the one not designated for customers, and she said, "You don't need permission. You need a plan and a bag. The bag first, because the plan takes longer, and the bag reminds you that the plan is real." I found the apartment on January 19th. It was a studio on the north side of the city, on the 3rd floor of a building with a working elevator, and a landlord named Mr. Vasek, who showed me the unit on a Thursday evening and said the 1st of March was available. The deposit was $632, which I paid in cash from the savings account Petra did not know existed. The one I had opened 2 years earlier at a credit union on Clement Street, different bank from ours, where I had been setting aside $200 every month since I was 21. By January, I had $4,816.40 in that account. Not a fortune. Enough. I packed the canvas tote that last Sunday in January. I packed the rest, 2 medium boxes, over 2 subsequent Saturday mornings and stored them in the supply room at work. Simone had a key and said she'd keep them there, no questions. My clothes, my books, the cedar box, the framed certificate from my night school course, the things that were genuinely mine. The copper kettle I left. It was Petra's kitchen even if it was also mine, and I did not want to take anything that would give her a reason to call me difficult. I had taken my name off the lease on January 31st, quietly, at the building management office, giving my 30-day notice and explaining that I would be vacating on March 1st. The manager noted it without much interest. Petra's name would remain. Her rent would adjust. That was between her and the building. None of this felt like revenge. It felt like paperwork. It felt like the reasonable, unhurried steps a person takes when they are finally done. It was 10:14 on that Tuesday night when I pulled into the parking lot of the all-night diner on Orchard Street, for miles from the apartment, and sat in my Honda Civic with the engine running and the heater on low. I did not go inside right away. I sat there with the radio off, and I thought about the 7 people at that table. I thought about Yolanda, who I had known my entire life, and whether she would stay neutral or take a side. I knew it would be neutral, which was its own kind of information. I thought about whether I had left the stove burner off. I was certain I had. I thought about the copper kettle, and whether it would be fine through the end of February. It would be fine. And then I thought about myself at 20 years old, carrying boxes up 4 flights of stairs with the particular optimism of someone who has decided that being needed is close enough to being wanted, and I thought about how long I had carried that confusion and how quietly it had cost me. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. Once. Then twice. Then 3 times in a cluster. I turned it face down without reading the screen. I sat in that parking lot for 38 minutes. The cold settled into the car despite the heater. The diner windows were lit orange, and I could see the outline of a waitress moving behind the counter. A man walked past with a dog, and the dog stopped and looked at my car, and then they kept moving. I watched all of this without urgency. I was not sad. I was not triumphant. I was something much smaller and quieter than either of those things. I was done, in the way you are done when you have finally spent the last of something that was never going to be enough anyway. At 10:52, I went inside and ordered Earl Grey tea and a piece of toast. I sat in the window booth with my canvas tote on the seat beside me, and I watched the street, and I ate the toast slowly, and I did not cry, and I did not feel the need to explain myself to anyone, including myself. I drove to my new apartment at 11:41 that night. Mr. Vasek had given me the key a week early as a courtesy. I had a sleeping bag, a pillow, and the 2 boxes Simone had been holding for me, which I would pick up from the supply room the next morning on my way to work. I let myself in with a new key and stood in the empty studio for a moment with the light off, listening to the building. It was quiet. The elevator hummed somewhere. Someone on another floor ran water for a few seconds and then stopped. I put my tote bag down and unrolled my sleeping bag on the floor next to the east-facing window. I slept better that night than I had in 3 years. She texted 31 times between 8:47 and 11:59 that evening. I know the exact number because I counted them 3 days later, on a Friday night, sitting cross-legged on the floor of my new apartment with a glass of water and the Earl Grey tin and the particular stillness of a room that belonged entirely to me. I read them in order, start to finish. The first 3 were confused. Where are you? Did something happen? Are you okay? Then there were several that were angry. Then 2 that were something adjacent to apology, but only adjacent, the kind of message that begins with "I'm sorry if," and then walks itself carefully backward until the sorry has disappeared, and only the if remains. Then there were more that were angry. The last one, sent at 2:17 in the morning, read, "Yolanda said you left the dinner. Where are you? This is so dramatic even for you." I set the phone down on the floor beside me. I thought about what I wanted to say back. I thought about it for a long time, the way you think about a thing when you are in no hurry and the answer matters to you more than the timing does. What I landed on was nothing. Not nothing cruel, not nothing strategic. Just nothing. I had spent 23 years in my family's orbit finding the right words to smooth over Petra's assessments of me, to present my reactions in formats that wouldn't alarm anyone, to explain myself in terms acceptable enough that the relationship could limp forward another few months. I was finished spending energy on that. I had nothing left to explain. I did not reply. 2 weeks after the dinner, Yolanda called. We talked for 40 minutes. Yolanda is careful with words, always has been, and she told me that Petra was upset, and also that Petra had said to her, "I don't understand why Delia took it so seriously." I listened without interrupting. I thanked her for calling. I told her I was well, which was true. She doesn't understand what she actually said. Yolanda told me. I know, I said. That was always the problem. We didn't talk for much longer after that. The rest of the call was just the time it took to say goodbye, and I was not unkind about it. My instructor at night school was a woman named Dr. Adiz Obi, and in the 3rd week of the spring term, she handed back a project I had spent 9 hours on, a branding identity for a fictional small business, the kind of assignment that is meant to be a technical exercise, but that I had approached with more investment than was strictly required. And at the top of the page, in red pen, she had written, "This is real instinct. Keep going." I folded that paper and put it in the cedar box when I got home. Not for safekeeping in the ordinary sense. I put it there because it belonged in the same category as my grandmother's letters, the things that told me who I was when I could not get that information from the people who were supposed to know me best. 6 weeks after the dinner, on a Sunday morning at 6:48, my phone lit up with a call from Petra's number. Not a text. An actual call. I watched it ring from across the room, where I was standing at my kitchen counter with a cup of tea, and I let it go to voicemail. She did not leave one. The call lasted 11 seconds according to the recent calls log, which meant she had waited just long enough to hear the voicemail greeting begin, and then ended the call without speaking. I thought about that for several days afterward. The single call. The silence where the voicemail would have been. I turned it over in my mind the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. Not because you expect to find something surprising, but because the turning is how you come to feel settled about it. I didn't know if it was pride that stopped her from leaving a message, or uncertainty, or something that had almost formed itself into the beginning of a real acknowledgement and then retreated. I may never know. That was not the same as needing to know. What I knew was my own life, which had begun, quietly, without announcement, the way good things tend to begin, to look like something I had chosen. My apartment had a working oven and a window that faced east, and a building quiet enough on weekday mornings that I could hear birds on the fire escape. I had bought a small wooden cutting board at the Clement Street Market. The new copper kettle from the same second-hand store on Farwell Avenue sat on my back burner, which worked on all 4 settings. Different kettle. Same store. I noticed that it made me feel something I recognized as continuity, not with Petra's apartment, but with a version of myself that had been there before the apartment, the version that had picked out the first kettle alone on a Saturday afternoon because she liked the weight of it in her hand. I was 2 months into seeing Dr. Fiona Lachelle, whose office was near the transit hub on Marsh Street and who had the particular quality, rare in my experience, of asking a question and then waiting, actually waiting, fully, without filling the gap, for the true answer rather than the first acceptable one. In our 5th session, she asked me, "What does it feel like to be the one who left, rather than the one who was left?" I sat with that for a moment. I said, like I finally did something I'd been told I wasn't capable of. She nodded. She said, "That's worth remembering." I wrote it in the leather appointment book that evening. Not as a lesson, just because it was true, and the true things were what I was learning to hold on to. Some things I have thought about since, in the months that followed that Tuesday in February. My sister did not intend cruelty the way a person intends to break something. She had grown up in a house that taught her a particular mathematics, that in any pair, one person was the capable one and one was the lesser one, and the capable one's role was to make this arrangement visible and hold it in place. She had inherited that mathematics from our mother without examining it, the way you inherit a way of holding your fork or a fear of certain weather, and she had applied it to me because I was the person closest and most available. That is not an excuse for what it cost me, but it is an explanation, and explanations are the thing I have found I needed more than apologies, because an apology can be given without understanding, and an explanation requires a person to see what they actually did. I do not know if Petra has arrived at that understanding. I do not know if she ever will. I have stopped making my peace contingent on finding out. Some kindnesses are loans the lender forgets they're keeping. For 3 years I had accepted a version of the story in which living with Petra was a generosity she was extending me, and I had paid the interest on that fiction in the form of my own steady diminishment. Cooked dinners, rearranged furniture, swallowed corrections, and the particular ongoing labor of being, in every room, slightly less than her. I paid that interest for 1,022 days. I was not going to pay it for 1,023. Love that demands you shrink is not love. It is management. There are roles in families that are assigned before you are old enough to know you have been cast in them. The lesser one. The one who doesn't quite add up. The footnote that makes the real sentence legible by contrast. I had been playing that role since before I could name it, and I had been playing it so thoroughly, so reliably, that I had come to believe, in some part of myself I had not fully examined, that the role and the person were the same thing. Setting those keys on the counter was the first time I understood they were not. Saying no did not make me cruel. It made me responsible to the person I had been setting aside for 23 years so that everyone else's version of me could fit comfortably in the room. The cost of keeping the peace in a house where peace means being the smallest person in the room is your whole life. And your whole life is the one thing you cannot keep paying out indefinitely. Eventually the account runs dry. That's not a failure of character. That's just arithmetic. The last thing I wrote in my leather appointment book, on a Sunday morning in August with the east-facing window full of early light and the copper kettle just beginning to steam on the back burner, was this: losing an illusion is still better than living inside one. I don't know if Petra and I will speak again, in any way that matters. I hope she finds her way to seeing clearly what that room asked of both of us, what our mother's mathematics cost her as well as me. I hope that for her sincerely, the way you hope something for a person you no longer have the energy to wait for. I don't need to be there when it happens. What I know is that I am 23 years old, and I live alone in an apartment with a working oven and an east window and a cedar box that holds the things I actually need to remember. I have an instructor who believes in my instincts. I have a therapist who waits for the true answer. I have a friend named Simone who held 2 boxes for me in a supply room without asking a single question, which is one of the most generous things anyone has ever done for me, and she might not even know it. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything that matters. And if you have ever sat in a room where someone you loved announced, easily, without drama, to other people that you don't quite count, I want to ask you something. Not about forgiveness. Not yet. Just this. How much longer are you going to stay in that room? Because the door is right there. And the keys, whenever you are ready, are already in your hand.